Well, what a year 2022 was. I played some games. Some of them came out this year, and some of them I even liked. I also released my own game. Cardboard Kings was the first game from the company I started with my mate Rob Gross, and it's something we're really proud of. I always have trouble doing these not game of the year videos for years where I release a game. Something breaks in my brain and I end up spending the year mostly playing old games. So anyways, these are all the games that I haven't found on anyone else's Game of the Year list, but are really worth your time. Kairosoft will, unfortunately, forever live in the shadow of the monumental success of Game Dev Story, and that's a shame, since they're one of those developers that I love despite being the opposite of my own approach to game development. Their extremely iterative designs and an obvious focus on quantity over quality could lead you to overlook some of their more banal themed releases, but I urge you, if you work in a creative field, if you often feel crushed by deadlines, or if you just need to play something to pull you back down to earth when you're dreaming of the wild success you'll enjoy pursuing an artistic dream project, play The Manga Works. Now I know what I just said might sound soul-crushing and bleak, but The Manga Works masterfully walks a tightrope of oh my god too real game mechanics and tongue-in-cheek satirizing of the manga industry. So what is the game? Comfortably, the game starts in a similar setup to Game Dev Story. You're a young up-and-comer who has to work hard to make it in the manga industry, only you do work hard and the goalposts move. So you work even harder, stretching your character's health to breaking point to meet deadlines, and the goalposts move again. Eventually, inevitably, the game hits you with the most brutally honest and kinda hilarious game mechanic I've seen in a game this year. Your character burns out and is hospitalized due to overwork. Your deadlines roll around, but you have no choice but to miss them and incur a huge penalty to your reputation while you sit on a respirator in a hospital bed. You receive no sympathy from your editors who just lambast you for making their lives more difficult, and then nothing. Your manga is dropped from serialization and you just chill, unemployed until you work up the enthusiasm to throw yourself back into the meat grinder, hoping a new manga will somehow defy all odds and become a mega hit. Playing this game, I was reminded of that one image that Naruto creator Masashi Kishimoto drew of his apartment. I feel like the game is almost an interactive adaptation of this picture. Even if you're not a mangaka, anyone who's attempted to freelance as an artist or strike out as an indie game developer will immediately be hit by the obvious place of personal experience that this game comes from. You should give it a try. Wowee, this one segues nicely from the last game. Goodbye World is a minimal game focused on telling the story of two friends who try to make it in the world of indie game development. I've never heard that before. Where it differs from The Manga Works is that, well, this game ends. There is a point at which these two characters decide they have truly finished their journey. And I won't spoil anything here, but this sort of game is absolutely worth the 2 hours it takes to finish, especially if you're an indie game developer. The pixel art is also fantastic, with a level of intricate detail to areas that lends a lived-in feeling to the game that you don't often see in larger titles. Part of why I spent so much time playing older titles this year was that I had access to a Steam Deck. My mate Steve had received one of these high-powered portable PCs from Valve early in the year, and he pretty much just let it gather dust, so that was my cue to give the old girl some attention. Naturally, the first thing I did was play through the entirety of Mirror's Edge on it, and then I bricked it by installing a bunch of emulators and stuff, but eventually I got around to playing Valve's free tutorial game? I'm not really sure what to call Aperture Desk Job. It really does feel like a tutorial for a game that doesn't exist, speeding you through a few tightly paced set pieces before rolling credits with the message to go play something else. I don't know, I just really appreciate this idea of Wii Sports style introduction to a console via the Portal universe. And while it's not something I would play again in a hurry, it was a recommendation I gave to all my friends who develop comedy games, as it just nails the hardest part of making me laugh in an interactive space: timing. If you have access to a Steam Deck, I recommend playing this before anything else. It'll put a smile on your face and teach you the basics of what your new toy is capable of, and I just think that's neat. So this was a late addition to this list. I actually played it in 2023, but it released in 2022, and it was so good I couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk about it. Time on Frog Island was described to me by the internet as so many different things, but what convinced me to give it a go in the end was that literally every review I saw complained that there was no map and no quest log. Now, I hate to be a contrarian. Who am I kidding? I love it. But when I see a small developer making a determined decision that is clearly hated by a lot of people, my ears perk up. Too often lately, I feel like small developers are practically begging me not to abandon their games, and now I hate how homogenous how many otherwise interesting titles feel because of that. Time on Frog Island was clearly trying to say something specific, and I was up to hear whatever that was. The game opens into gameplay almost immediately, taking only the shortest detour to show the player character becoming shipwrecked on the titular Frog Island. With almost no direction, the player is trusted to deduce that their goal is to repair their ship and set sail once more. In fact, there is more time spent wordlessly explaining the backstory of the game's shipwrecked hero than there is explaining the peculiarities of its jumping mechanics. Almost every interaction the player can perform in this game is done through picking up and placing down items in a game loop that ends up feeling like a systemic open world version of Monkey Island, but that really undersells the game, as the true challenge lies in testing your ability to memorize the island and the location of its dozens of items and inhabitants. The natives of Frog Island are all willing to help you repair your ship, but in a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours sort of arrangement. Chatting with any of these amphibious denizens won't have you reading painfully twee dialogue, but instead presents you with small emoji-like speech bubbles depicting the needs and desires of the speaker. I was amazed at how much I liked this system, and while I can't say I grew to love any of the characters, I got such a clear, concise picture of them that I never felt like the game was trying to rest on its theme and graphics over its gameplay. The inventiveness and experimentation of the game's movement made me reflect on 2019's A Short Hike and how pedestrian and obvious so much of its design was. Time on Frog Island trusts the player to experiment and often fail in their attempts to traverse its world, using a core mechanic of pick up and put down to hide a plethora of quirky movement gimmicks around the world. I think its short length and absolute lack of number go up design is what solidified this as an all-time great for me. In a year in which I also played Moon RPG Remix and Boku no Natsuyasumi 2, I felt that Time on Frog Island stood out to me as a new high watermark for this style of open world adventure game, and something I'm personally going to look to for inspiration for my future games. I have a few honourable mentions this year. Digimon Survive is pretty and a fairly compelling visual novel, but I doubt anyone who isn't already a big fan of the franchise will get much out of it. I never really watched Digimon anime as a kid, so outside of its nods to the virtual pet toys, I wasn't really driven to finish it, but hey, it might be for you. Jack Move is a great little fun-sized JRPG in the vein of Final Fantasy, with a setting that screams, God, I hope Soul Hackers 2 is a flop. This game was developed by my good friend Ed Paris and has some fantastic presentation and a great soundtrack that immediately lets you know how old he is. Another banging game from my friends over at Samurai Punk. To be honest, I have to include Justice Sucks in the video just because I'm renting a desk in their office, but luckily it's also a fantastically charming stealth action game with the most insane comedy I've ever seen in the genre. Hey, what do you know? I put my own game at the end. Look, I think it's pretty obvious why Cardboard Kings would be the game that meant the most to me this year, so I don't really want to sit here explaining my own sentimental bullshit. But in terms of an actual recommendation, I'd say Cardboard Kings is a game for people who want to play a game about collecting things, but also tries to make you appreciate each one of those things individually. Rob and I worked really hard to design a management game about actually managing a shop rather than about growing it into an amorphous capitalist nightmare. So if that sounds like a jam to you, give it a shot. And yeah, what a year. I always think a year has been a bit meh, and then this video reminds me of the sick games I've played, which is honestly the reason I keep making them. But yeah, did you guys play any of these games? Did you absolutely detest them? Tell me exactly how wrong I am about absolutely everything in the comments, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.